Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into somewhere colder, foggier, and honestly, a place where your survival instincts would probably file a complaint. You're walking with me into the damp breath of 19th-century London, a city that never really sleeps, where the air tastes faintly like coal dust, and the places people called beds were, well, you probably wouldn't last a night in them. Before we drift into that world, let me remind you of something. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're already tucked into a soft, normal bed, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take slow steps along a slick cobblestone street where the fog hangs around your shoulders like an old, worn-out blanket. London under your feet isn't the one from charming postcards. It's darker, heavier, and its sounds feel like they're coming from the bottom of a deep well. You hear the clop of horseshoes, wooden wheels grinding over stone, and cold wind brushing your face as if the night itself is reminding you who's in charge. Somewhere farther down, the faint call of a newsboy echoes through the haze, like someone trying to keep the city awake just a little longer. You pull your coat tighter as the damp chill creeps up your sleeves and into your bones. And that's when you start to understand why a warm place to sleep in this city, at this moment, was something people would do almost anything to get. But warm, in 19th-century London, doesn't mean what you think. No memory foam mattresses, no fluffy duvets, no cute bedside lamp. Not even a proper bed for most people. For thousands of workers, sleeping meant finding anything, anywhere, that could shield them from the wind, the rain, or a night spent shivering under a bridge. And that's when you hear the first whispers about something called coffin beds. Sounds like a dark joke, right? But no, they were exactly what the name suggests. Narrow wooden boxes, shaped like open coffins, big enough for one exhausted body. No lid, thankfully, but not much room to move either. It sounds creepy, but for countless exhausted laborers, that was considered an upgrade, something better than sleeping out on the streets. You wander down a cramped alley, its soot-stained brick walls leaning in like they're eavesdropping. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and London's population is exploding faster than housing can keep up. Workers arrive by the thousands. Buildings go up quickly, but not nearly quickly enough, and work is brutal. You picture people dragging themselves home after 12, 16-hour shifts, faces smudged with grime, eyes lined with shadows. At that point, comfort stops being a goal. Not dying of cold becomes the real priority. Here's a weird little fact many people don't know. Some lodging houses didn't even rent beds for a full night. You paid a few pennies and got to stay only until sunrise. They kicked everyone out, swept the floors, and prepared for the next crowd. And those coffin beds? They offered the perfect way for landlords to pack as many humans into a room as physically possible. You know how some modern apartments advertise efficient use of space? This was the nightmare version of that. A single room could hold dozens of those wooden boxes. If you rolled over too enthusiastically, congratulations, you just poked the stranger beside you. Unintentional ASMR, Victorian edition. You pause near the entrance of a lodging house as a deep, hacking cough echoes out. It's the soundtrack of Victorian London. Polluted air, sick workers, and sealed, unventilated rooms packed with bodies. You imagine the stale smell, smoke, sweat, damp clothes, and whatever dinner someone had 3 days ago. Suddenly you're grateful for every scented candle you've ever owned. Inside, people haggle over prices. 1 penny for the sleeping standing up area. Yes, that was real. 3 pennies for the rope support, leaning sleep. 5 pennies for a coffin bed. Sleeping standing up might sound like a punishment invented by your least favorite PE teacher, but it absolutely existed. Historians still debate whether people leaned on ropes, walls, or each other. But you can imagine your head bobbing like you're fighting off sleep during the world's most boring lecture. You walk deeper into the building until you reach the rows of coffin beds. Wooden boards creak. Someone shifts. Someone else coughs. A man lies there with calloused hands and a face darkened by long days at the docks. He glances at you with a look that's both tired and cautious, the kind that says, "Got any better options?" You take a step back, feeling the air press against your chest. It's heavy, stale, and too still. But there's also a quiet sadness to it, because these people weren't looking for comfort. They were just trying to survive the night. And if you've ever complained about a hotel mattress being a bit too firm, well, this place might humble you. Back outside, the fog swallows the edges of the street again. But now you notice something new, an undercurrent of stories woven into the stones beneath your feet. Stories about cramped wooden boxes, exhausted bodies, and the strange ways humans endure the worlds they're born into. You keep walking into the night, your breath mixing with the cold London mist, and the city begins to reveal the next layer of its secrets, ready for you to discover. You follow the narrow street until it bends toward a busier stretch, one lit by flickering gas lamps that paint everything in tired yellow. The fog thins just enough for you to see silhouettes drifting in and out of doorways. Men and women who've worked themselves past exhaustion and are now negotiating their nightly ritual, finding a place to sleep without freezing. This is where you step into the world of the two-penny lodging house, the cheapest kind of paid shelter in London. You push open a warped wooden door, its hinges giving a long groan like it just woke up from a nap it didn't want to end. Inside, the warmth you expect doesn't materialize. Instead, you're greeted by something closer to a humid pocket of breath trapped inside four walls. Dense, sour, and stale. It clings to you like a coat you don't remember putting on. The floor creaks under your weight, and somewhere above, something, or someone, shifts, sending down a small shower of dust. 2 pennies might not sound like much, but in 19th-century London, it was a meaningful choice. That tiny coin could buy you a handful of food, a pint of beer, or, if you were desperate enough, a spot in a lodging house. Not a room. A spot, which meant whatever the owner decided counted as somewhere to sleep. You weren't paying for comfort. You were paying for the right not to collapse in the street and get arrested for vagrancy. The crowd inside is a mixture of faces: dock workers, street sweepers, washerwomen, chimney boys with soot still smeared across their cheeks, and men who look like they've carried bricks all day and arguments all night. Everyone wears the same expression, an exhausted, hollow kind of alertness. The day may be over, but the fight to sleep safely is still very much on. And as you step further in, you start to see why these spaces mattered so much. At the front counter, a board balanced on 2 crates, a woman with sharp eyes and quicker hands collects coins. You watch her sweep pennies into a tin box so fast that the sounds blur together. Every so often, she pauses to shout instructions. Upstairs if you paid for a rope. Beds to the right. Standing sleepers in the back. The whole thing runs like a chaotic factory assembly line. Except here the product is human exhaustion. You edge past her and enter the main room, a long chamber with wooden beams sagging under the weight of 2 many winters. Rows of benches fill the space, and dozens of people are sitting, hunched, nodding off as they wait for their turn to claim a sleeping spot. Some rub their hands together for warmth. Others keep them tucked under their arms as if afraid the cold might steal their fingers. A man next to you mutters that if you arrive too late, even a rope bed will be gone. Rope bed. What a generous name for something that's basically a line of thick rope stretched across the room. You lean over to get a better look and find a row of people arranged like coats on a rack, leaning forward with their arms dangling. They doze in a strange suspended slump, held up only by that single taut rope pressing into their stomachs. Historians still argue over how comfortable this was. Some say it wasn't half bad, others swear it was closer to medieval torture. But looking at the people here, you sense comfort is not the point. The point is just not falling over. You keep moving until you reach another section. 5-penny coffin beds line the walls, each one already claimed by someone curled up like a letter folded too tightly into an envelope. A mother sleeps with her baby tucked against her chest, their bodies squeezed into the narrow wooden box. A boy no older than 11 lies with his shoes still on, as if he's afraid taking them off might invite someone to steal them. A man a few feet away snores with the intensity of someone who has lost every argument with life except this one moment of rest. You don't linger long. Something inside you shifts, empathy, maybe, or the uncomfortable realization that in another century, another life, this could have been you. You step back into the hallway and accidentally bump into a group of workers squeezing through the doorway. Their clothes are stiff with dirt from the docks. Their breath smell of sea brine and cheap ale. One of them apologizes, but he's barely awake enough to finish the sentence. Upstairs, the air gets even thicker, and you find another room packed with benches. Some people sit shoulder to shoulder, trying to stay awake until a bed opens. Others slump into each other like dominoes that never fully fell. You catch a glimpse of one man holding a small tin cup, whispering a short prayer before closing his eyes. You realize he's not asking for a miracle, just a few hours of sleep without someone nudging him awake. A sudden thud shakes the ceiling above you. Someone probably fell off a bench, a result of the nightly choreography of bodies trying to stay upright while unconscious. A few people chuckle softly, not because it's funny but because humor is a thin little thread they can still grasp. Someone jokes that falling asleep here is like playing a Victorian version of Jenga. Near the back, you find the most startling part of the two-penny lodging house, the standing room. A narrow space where the poorest souls, those who couldn't spare even 2 pennies, pressed themselves upright against the walls. Their heads nod, their bodies sway, and their legs tremble from exhaustion. Guards or attendants walk around poking them if they slide too low, reminding them that standing is literally the only thing they paid for. You can't help it. You picture modern gyms charging people to sleep vertically as some bizarre wellness trend. Give it a decade, someone will try it. You pause again, listening. All around you, the building breathes, creaks, murmurs, snores, coughs, whispers, shuffles. It's a strange, communal exhaustion, and it tells a story of a city outgrowing its own humanity. These workers weren't lazy or careless. They were the engine keeping London alive, hauling coal, scrubbing floors, unloading ships, stitching clothes. And all they had to come home to was a bench, a rope, a box, or a wall. You step back outside for air, but the cold hits your face like a slap soaked in ice water. The fog has thickened again, swirling in slow, ghostly ribbons. You watch a few men stumble out of another lodging house down the street, already half asleep as they push the door open. London continues to breathe around you. Rough, ragged, relentless. And you start to understand that in this city, a simple night's rest was never simple at all. It was a battle fought daily by people with empty pockets, sore hands, and nowhere else to go. You walk on, feeling the weight of what you've seen settle into your chest, and the night begins guiding you toward a far stranger invention waiting in the shadows, the coffin bed itself. You follow the street as it narrows again, slipping between brick buildings that lean like tired old men trying to hold each other up. Somewhere ahead, you hear a steady rhythm, wood knocking against wood, faint, uneven, almost like a heartbeat. It draws you in, guiding your steps until the alley opens into a courtyard lit by a single gas lamp sputtering against the cold. And there, stacked in crooked rows along the wall, you finally see them, the coffin beds. At first glance, they look like shipping crates someone forgot to finish building, long, narrow wooden boxes with rough edges and just enough space for a person to lie flat if they don't mind their elbows brushing both sides. You crouch beside one, running your fingers gently along the splintered surface. The wood is cold and slightly damp, as if it's been absorbing London's misery for years. And in a way it has. You straighten up and watch a young boy, barely 17, pay his 5 pennies to the owner and slip into one of the boxes. He curls onto his side, hugging his coat to his chest, and in seconds, he's asleep. Not peacefully, not comfortably, but instantly, like exhaustion has reached inside him and pulled a switch. You're struck by how natural it seems for him. Even though everything about this setup screams this can't possibly be normal. Yet for thousands of people in this city, it absolutely was. The owner, a stout man with a stiff wool coat and a face shaped like a cracked brick, stands nearby counting his earnings. He glances at you, then at the rows of boxes, almost proudly, like he's showing off a well-run business rather than what looks suspiciously like a warehouse for tired souls. He taps the box nearest to him and says, "Best bargain in London. Private, warmish, and no one kicks you if you snore." Warmish. That's doing a lot of heavy lifting. You take a slow walk between the rows, trying to imagine lying in one of these things yourself. The walls feel too close, the air too still, and the silence too heavy, like the box wants to swallow you whole. It's an odd balance of safety and suffocation. A place where you're protected from the outside world, but also trapped by it. And the strangest part? These coffin beds were considered a middle-tier option. Not the worst, not the best. Just there in the bizarre menu of Victorian sleeping arrangements. You lean against a post and watch the flow of people entering the courtyard. A group of factory workers shuffle in with the same dragging step, their boots scraped raw, their shirts clinging to their backs with dried sweat. One man rubs his shoulder, wincing with every breath, the kind of pain only a 16-hour shift can give. He drops his coins into the owner's hand and collapses into a box before the owner even counts them. A woman arrives next, clutching a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside is her child, barely toddler-aged, already asleep. She asks quietly if there's a wider bed available, just for tonight. The owner shakes his head. Everything is standard size. She hesitates, then climbs into a coffin bed and curls herself around the child, trying to fold a whole life into half a space. You feel something twist inside you. It's a small, sharp ache that lingers as you step away. Nearby, two older men argue softly about whether coffin beds came from an idea borrowed from monasteries or soldiers' sleeping boxes on naval ships. Historians still debate where the concept first spread in London. Some claim it began in cheap lodging houses near the docks. Others insist it emerged from overcrowded labor hostels inland. Whatever the truth, it caught on fast, too fast, and in too many places. You take a breath and sit on an empty crate. Around you, the courtyard settles into a rhythm. Coughs, the rustle of clothing, a distant whistle from a night watchman. The city feels like it's exhaling through its cracks, letting out a long, tired sigh. A thought crosses your mind. In a world where comfort was rare and privacy even rarer, maybe lying in your own wooden box, sealed off from arguments, drunken brawls, and the constant threat of being kicked awake, felt like a tiny luxury. A cramped, claustrophobic, splinter-filled luxury, but still. A man walks past you carrying a jar of something murky. He sets it beside his coffin bed, muttering that it's to keep the bugs away. You quickly decide not to ask for details. Another man tucks his boots under his head like a pillow. Someone else stuffs newspaper under their back for cushioning. Victorian life hacks, most of which, thankfully, did not survive into the modern era. You spot one bed that's slightly larger, and the owner tells you it's the deluxe model. You blink, thinking he's joking, until he proudly explains it's wide enough for someone to turn over without scraping their shoulder. He waits for your reaction, smiling. You nod politely, even though your entire brain is screaming. That's your deluxe option? Really? Someone nearby jokes that if funerals were this cramped, souls would refuse to leave their bodies. A few people chuckle, quiet, tired laughter, but it's enough to lighten the gloom for a moment. Humor, even the dark kind, is a survival tool here. It softens the edges. Another man says that sleeping in a coffin bed feels like getting a preview of the afterlife. You don't laugh at that one. Something about how sincerely he says it keeps the joke from landing. You step outside again, needing air. The fog has returned, swirling around your ankles like it wants to follow you. The gas lamp flickers overhead, casting trembling shadows across the courtyard. Behind you, the wooden boxes creak and sigh as their occupants shift and sleep. You walk toward the next street, and London seems to expand outward again, still cold, still harsh, but full of stories pulsing beneath its skin. And now that you've seen how people sleep here, you're beginning to understand how the city shapes them, how it squeezes them into narrow spaces, forces them into uncomfortable shapes, and somehow still expects them to rebuild the world each morning. You pull your coat tighter and continue on into the night, knowing the path ahead is only going to get stranger, darker, and far more crowded than you ever imagined. You walk deeper into the maze of London's back streets, and the air grows colder, sharper, almost metallic. It nips at your cheeks, seeps through your coat, and reminds you that this city is not built for comfort, at least, not for people without money. As you turn a corner, you hear a chorus of coughs drifting from an open doorway, thick and ragged, like the building itself is wheezing. And that's when it hits you. The coffin beds weren't just cramped. They were dangerous in ways most people today can barely imagine. You step into a narrow hallway lit by two sputtering lamps that cast more shadow than light. The floor is uneven, damp in some places, sticky in others. The smell is an unsettling mixture of sweat, mildew, and coal smoke, like someone tried to bottle the essence of Victorian hardship and accidentally spilled it everywhere. You feel your lungs tighten a little, And for good reason. This is the world where disease spread like gossip, fast and everywhere. As you climb the staircase, the wood groaning under your weight, you catch sight of a woman leaning against the wall, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. When she lowers it, you notice the specks of red, small, but bright enough to tell their own bleak story. Tuberculosis, cholera, influenza, these didn't just haunt the city. They lived here, nested in every damp corner, and fed on cramped living spaces like this. You enter a long room packed with coffin beds, more than you saw earlier. People are curled inside them like fragile question marks. Every few seconds, a cough breaks the quiet, followed by another, then another, until it becomes a chain reaction. It's like the building is performing its own sad percussion piece. You imagine trying to sleep here, surrounded by hollow echoes of sick lungs, and you quietly thank modern medicine for existing. Someone near you mutters that the moisture in the room is good for the mold, but bad for the people. They're joking, maybe, but only halfway. The walls are streaked with dark patches that look like the building has been crying. A man reaches out and touches the wall. His finger comes back damp. You step back instinctively, because absolutely nothing good comes from touching Victorian moisture. A thin boy, maybe 9 or 10, lies in a coffin bed with a blanket that's barely more than a threadbare cloth. His skin glows pale beneath the dim light, and you can hear a faint whistling sound every time he breathes. His mother sits beside him, brushing his hair with her fingers, whispering something soft and rhythmic. It sounds like a lullaby you can't quite decipher. She glances at you with tired eyes, the kind that have seen hope wilt more than once. But she offers a small smile anyway, as though politeness can still survive even here. You move on, but the image stays with you. Farther down the row, a group of men talk quietly about a sickness spreading through the docks. One claims it came from contaminated water. Another insists it's the fog itself. Historians still debate how various outbreaks move through the city, but what's clear, painfully clear, is that places like this were perfect incubators. Poor ventilation, overcrowding, shared blankets, shared air. This was basically a Victorian buffet for pathogens. You pause beside a window, or what used to be one. Now it's a cracked pane that can't fully close, letting in just enough cold to chill the room, but not enough fresh air to help anyone. People shove rags and bits of paper into the gaps to block the drafts. A few candles flicker on an old crate, offering more smoke than light. You exhale slowly, realizing that the heaviness in your chest isn't just emotional. This room really is hard to breathe in. You imagine lying inside one of those narrow boxes, staring at the low ceiling, listening to the chorus of coughs, the restless shifting of bodies, and the constant fear. Fear that the person next to you might be too sick to wake up. Fear that you might be next. Even if you weren't ill when you entered, you might easily leave that way. A sudden noise snaps your attention, a bucket dropping, the clatter echoing like a warning. A man picks it up and mutters about needing to empty it. You don't want to think too hard about what's inside, but let's just say indoor plumbing wasn't exactly part of the package deal here. Victorian lodging houses had systems, but not ones you'd want to experience firsthand. Someone near the doorway tries to open a window fully, pushing with both hands. It groans but refuses to budge more than an inch. When he finally gives up, he jokes, "Well, at least the air inside is warmer." He leaves out the part where it's warmer because dozens of people are breathing the same stale air. Sometimes humor is all you have. You leave the room and step back into the hallway, but the chill outside suddenly feels less hostile. It's strange. The fog, the cold wind, the harsh night. Somehow they feel cleaner than what you just walked through. You breathe deeper, grateful for air that isn't shared by 50 people at once. As you descend the stairs, you can't shake the thought that for many workers, these coffin beds were the closest thing they had to safety, even though they were also a breeding ground for illness. Comfort wasn't the standard, survival was. And survival did not always look noble or dignified. Sometimes it looked like a narrow wooden box and a cough that wouldn't go away. You step back onto the street, the fog curling around your feet like a cat brushing against your legs. The gas lamps flicker overhead, and London whispers in its sleepless voice. Your journey continues, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, more stories wait, stories shaped by exhaustion, necessity, and a city struggling to care for its own people. If you listen closely, the night seems to murmur, guiding you onward, deeper into the world where coffin beds weren't the strangest thing, just one of the most heartbreaking. You keep walking through the fog-choked streets, and as the night settles deeper around you, a new sound rises, metal clanking, boots dragging, a low rumble like a giant exhaling. You follow it instinctively until the alley opens into a broad road lined with factories, their tall chimneys piercing the sky like soot-stained fingers. The air here is warmer, but only because furnaces never sleep. This is where London's day begins long before sunrise, and sometimes never ends at all. You watch a long line of workers spill out of a factory gate, shoulders slumped, faces streaked with grime. Their clothes cling to them with the weight of sweat, dust, and exhaustion that has settled so deep it seems part of their skin. These are the people who shaped the city, literally, with their hands, and yet have so little to show for it except calloused palms and bones that move like rusty hinges. One of them stumbles slightly as he walks past you, too tired to lift his feet. Another man beside him grips his arm to steady him. Neither says a word. They don't need to. Their bodies speak a language built from long hours, aching muscles, and a desperation so old it feels inherited. You follow them down a side street, and the more you watch, the more you realize the coffin beds weren't strange at all. They were inevitable. When you work from before dawn to after dusk, often for 6 days straight, comfort stops being a priority. You don't hunt for luxury. You hunt for anything that lets you collapse without freezing. A young woman emerges from another factory gate, rubbing her wrists where deep red marks circle her skin. Scars from the spinning machines, she feeds thread into every day. She catches your gaze briefly, offering a tired smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Then she drifts toward a lodging house, her steps automatic, like she's walking a path she's taken so often her body knows it by memory alone. You breathe in, and the air tastes of hot metal and coal. It coats your tongue, your throat. No wonder lungs gave out so quickly here. In a place like this, even breathing is a job. A group of dock workers rounds the corner, joking weakly as they walk. One says he might sleep in a real bed one day, and the others laugh. Not because it's a funny dream, but because it feels impossible. Another jokes that if he ever lies down on something soft, he'll probably sink so deep he'll never wake up again. They all chuckle at that one, and for a brief moment, it lightens the air. You trail behind them as they head toward the harbor. The smell of brine and wet rope is strong here, mixed with the unmistakable scent of sweat-soaked wool. Ships loom in the fog like ghostly beasts, their masts rising through the darkness. Workers unload heavy crates, the hammering of hooks and chains echoing across the water. A foreman shouts instructions, his voice hoarse from decades of yelling over waves and wind. A crate crashes down too hard, sending splinters flying, but nobody jumps. They're too used to danger to flinch. You wonder how many of them sleep in coffin beds, how many collapse into wooden boxes each night with hands so numb they can't even untie their boots. One man tells his companions he's been awake for almost 30 hours. A second man shrugs and says he once did 36. A third says, "I beat that when the ships came in last winter." Historians still debate how long Victorian laborers really worked, but even conservative estimates stretch far beyond anything modern workers would recognize as humane. You can see why people didn't complain, because complaining didn't pay. Complaining didn't shelter your children. Complaining didn't fill your stomach, and it didn't stop the city from grinding forward with or without you. As the workers disperse toward the lodging houses, you follow one man who moves particularly slowly. He clutches his ribs every few steps, wincing. When he reaches the door of a dingy building, he presses his back to the wall and slides down until he's sitting in the dirt. His hands shake slightly as he pulls off his boots, each movement coordinated with pain. He notices you staring and lets out a weak laugh. "Don't worry," he says, "just bruised ribs. The crate slipped today. Happens. Happens. Like it's normal." He pushes himself up with effort and disappears inside. You step inside after him, and the warmth hits you like a damp towel, heavy and unpleasant, but still better than the cold outside. Workers fill nearly every corner. Some sink onto benches. Some strip off their coats, revealing shirts torn from friction and years of scrubbing. Others head straight for the coffin beds in the back. You notice a man sitting alone, rubbing his swollen fingers. They're raw and cracked, the kind of damage that comes from working long hours in icy water. He looks at his hands like they're tools he borrowed and wore down too quickly. Nearby, a woman nods off while sitting upright. Every few seconds her head drops forward, and she jerks awake, then tries again. A friend nudges her lightly and jokes, "Sleep now, work later, die eventually." They both laugh softly. It's dark humor, but it's the glue holding them together. In a quiet corner, two men talk about a coworker who collapsed yesterday. One says he thinks it was exhaustion. The other says it was the fumes from the factory. A third mutters that the man overheard his wife was sick, and the stress pushed him over the edge. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know. And the city keeps moving. You step back outside again, needing air. The night feels enormous compared to the cramped rooms you just came from. You breathe in the cold again, and it stings, but at least it's clean. You look down the street where more workers trudge along, faces blank, steps heavy, each one searching for a place to lay their weight down for a few hours before the city demands more from them. And with that realization settling deep in your chest, you keep walking, knowing that the next group you meet will be even more vulnerable than these, the ones without even a coffin bed to claim. You follow the stream of workers until it thins out, leaving the street quieter, lonelier. The fog settles heavier here, turning every lantern into a soft, hazy moon. And slowly, as you walk farther from the factories and lodging houses, the city reveals a different crowd. People who aren't heading toward a place to sleep, but wandering because they have nowhere to sleep at all. You see them first as shapes curled under stairways, tucked against door frames, huddled in alleys like shadows that forgot to disappear. These are London's homeless, tens of thousands of them in the 19th century, surviving night after night, with less than even the coffin bed crowd had. They drift through the fog with slow, uncertain steps, like ghosts who haven't decided where to haunt. One man sits beside a wall, his knees pulled tight to his chest, his coat wrapped around him like a shell. The coat is threadbare, missing buttons, and stained with the soot of countless nights spent outdoors. He glances up at you with guarded eyes, not angry, not pleading, just tired in a way that feels older than he is. He says nothing. In London, silence is a form of dignity when you have nothing else left. A few steps ahead, two young boys, maybe 12, maybe younger, it's hard to tell, sit under a broken archway playing a quiet game of checkers carved into the dirt. Their pieces are bottle caps and bits of tile. Every now and then, one of them presses a hand to his stomach, the universal gesture of hunger. But they keep playing anyway, because games make the cold a little less sharp. You kneel to watch for a moment. Their moves are quick, practiced. One boy grins when he jumps the other's piece. For a second, they look like ordinary kids. Then the wind cuts through, and their faces go hard again. Childhood doesn't last long in a place like this. You stand and continue on, passing a woman wrapped in a shawl too thin to protect her from anything. She has made a nest of sorts from crates, straw, and a few scraps of cloth, like a bird trying to build a home from whatever the city leaves behind. She hums to herself, a soft, wavering melody that trembles in the air. Her voice is surprisingly warm, gentle even, and you feel your chest tighten. She deserves a room, a bed, a fire, anything other than this exposure to cold that gnaws at her bones. A man across the alley is building a small fire inside a metal barrel, feeding it with torn bits of newspaper. You watch the ash swirl upward like gray snow. He notices you looking and says, "Cold keeps you awake. If you sleep out here too long, you don't wake up again." His tone is calm, matter of fact, as though he's stating the weather. And he's right. People froze to death on these streets more often than you want to think about. Newspapers printed the stories with a kind of grim routine, as if passing along the day's market prices. Nearby, someone coughs, a deep, hollow sound that vibrates through the alley. You look and see a thin man leaning against the wall, one hand on his chest. His breath comes out in white bursts. He wipes his mouth on his sleeve and shivers violently. He needs warmth, medicine, help. Instead, he'll probably spend the night trembling in the cold, holding on to consciousness like it's slipping through his fingers. You keep moving, watching as the homeless cluster in small groups around makeshift shelters. Some gather beneath overhangs. Some line up along warm air vents near bakeries or factories. Some lean against one another, sharing body heat in the most literal sense. Even here, Community exists in raw, unpolished form. The instinct to take care of one another when the city doesn't. At the far end of a narrow passage, you spot something even more desperate. A group of people stand in a small line, waiting for a chance to sleep in what's called a penny hang. A rope stretched across the room inside gives people something to lean on while they doze. It's cheaper than the two-penny lodging house, cheaper than the coffin bed. This is sleep stripped to its most basic, most fragile state. Unconsciousness supported by a rope. A man at the front of the line turns toward you. 2 hours if we're lucky tonight, he says. Last night the queue was longer. You ask if he prefers the rope to sleeping outside. It's not about comfort, he replies softly. It's about being alive when the sun comes up. You step aside as a woman rushes past you, pulling her shawl tighter. She stops at the mouth of the alley, looks around nervously, and then settles down beside a mound of burlap sacks. The ground is cold, but at least the sacks block some of the wind. She closes her eyes and tries to sleep, but every few seconds she jolts awake at some noise, a carriage rolling by, a dog barking, a drunk shouting farther down the street. Rest isn't rest when fear is always listening. You turn down another street and see more signs of survival. A man digs through a pile of discarded crates, looking for anything he can use to prop himself up off the ground. A woman tries to sell a bundle of matches, far too few for a real profit, but maybe enough for a night's lodging if she gets lucky. 2 teenagers huddle beside a bakery door, hoping the warmth leaking through the cracks will keep them from shaking apart. One boy, maybe 15, sits alone with his hands shoved under his armpits. His lips are blue. You crouch beside him and he startles, then relaxes when he sees you're not a constable. He tells you he used to work, but an injury stopped him. Now no one hires him, and he's been sleeping outside for weeks. When you ask him where his family is, he shrugs, eyes dull. Lost them, he whispers. The words are simple, but they land like stones. You stand again, your breath swirling in the fog. London at night is quiet, but not peaceful. It's a hush full of worry, full of people clinging to life in the narrowest ways. And for those without even a coffin bed, every night is a test. A silent question the city asks them over and over. Can you survive me? As you walk away from the alley, you can still feel the weight of their presence behind you. It presses on your shoulders, settles in your chest, reminds you that the world of coffin beds was not the worst layer of this city, just one of many. You continue forward, step by step, the fog swallowing the road ahead as London guides you deeper into its restless, sleepless heart. You drift back toward the busier streets, and the fog around you thins just enough for the city's voice to grow louder. It starts as a low hum, barely there, almost gentle, but with each step you take, the sound of London at night layers itself piece by piece until the whole place feels alive beneath your feet. Cold as it is, this city never really sleeps. It only shifts, rearranges itself, and hums a different tune after dark. You pause at a corner where the cobblestones are slick with moisture, and you just listen. The first sound you notice is the clatter of a cart bouncing unevenly over a broken stretch of road. Its wooden wheels squeal and rattle like a creature begging for mercy. Then comes the clip-clop of horses, steady, rhythmic, comforting in a strange way. Their breath steams in the air, little clouds rising and fading in an instant. A newspaper boy calls out headlines you can't quite make out, his voice cracking from either age or exhaustion. Someone slams a door in the distance. A dog barks. A woman's laughter floats briefly through an alley before vanishing like a spark into the fog. Everything around you blends into this quiet, chaotic symphony that only a city this crowded could produce. You walk on, and the noise changes. It becomes tighter, sharper as you approach another lodging house. Through thin walls you hear muffled snores layered with coughing, footsteps overhead, and the occasional grunt of someone turning too sharply in a coffin bed. A door creaks open, then slams shut. Someone shouts something about fleas. Someone else tells them to shut up and let people rest. The argument lasts maybe 3 seconds before dissolving back into the rhythm of exhaustion. You stop for a moment and imagine trying to sleep here, surrounded by dozens of strangers whose bodies make noise whether they want to or not. Breathing, shifting, coughing, muttering in their dreams. The walls amplify everything. Privacy doesn't exist here. Silence doesn't either. It's a shared sensory experience, like living inside a human-sized beehive. Someone near you murmurs. At least the noise means people are alive. It's a dark joke, maybe, but there's truth in it too. You move on, and the soundscape shifts again. This time, you're near a busy tavern where men spill into the street laughing, arguing, singing badly, and announcing loudly that they aren't even drunk yet. A few fall over the curb, laugh about it, then get into a scuffle that ends just as quickly as it starts. They're loud, sweaty, chaotic, and surprisingly human in a way the Coffin Beds aren't. Disordered joy is still joy, but once they stagger home or pass out somewhere, the street returns to its baseline, the quiet churning of a city too crowded to ever truly rest. A constable walks by, his boots thudding with slow authority. He taps his baton against a lamppost. Once, twice, a signal meant to reassure residents or warn troublemakers, depending on who's listening. The sound echoes down the lane, clear and hollow, like dropping a stone into a deep well. Further ahead, you notice a group of street sweepers finishing their shift. Their brooms scrape across cobblestones, whispering in a steady rhythm that circles through your ears like a lullaby made of work. One man jokes that if he sweeps long enough, he'll eventually brush away the entire city and get a day off. Historians still debate exactly how often the streets were cleaned, but what you do know is that the city's noise never stopped long enough to let results show. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a chimney boy sprinting down the street. He's tiny, maybe 8 or 9, covered in soot from head to toe. He's laughing though, a bright, bell-like sound that slices cleanly through the heavy fog. Behind him, an older sweep shouts for him to slow down before he slips. The boy ignores him, his small boots tapping a playful rhythm on the stone. Even in this harsh landscape, life finds moments to glow. You step aside as a delivery wagon rumbles by, its driver half asleep, drooping like a wilted plant. The horse looks more awake than he does. The wagon groans as it passes, wheels grumbling their complaints to anyone willing to listen. You suspect Victorian wheels and modern customer service have a lot in common. Both make noise when overworked. You walk toward the river, and the city shifts again. The air grows colder here, and the sound changes shape, broader, deeper. You hear the Thames moving slowly, dragging London's secrets along with its current. Ships creak. Ropes snap taut. Water slaps gently against stone piers. Somewhere nearby, a sailor sings a low, melancholy tune about a girl from Bristol he probably never actually met. As you stand on the embankment, the city's orchestra crescendos softly around you. It's not violent or overwhelming. It's just constant. A reminder that this place is built from millions of struggling lives, each one adding its own small sound to the night. You close your eyes and imagine lying in a coffin bed with these noises swirling around your head, a soundtrack of survival. Would it comfort you? Distract you? Keep you awake? You can't decide. But one thing becomes clear. In a city where people slept in boxes, on ropes, or standing against walls, silence was a luxury too expensive to afford. As you open your eyes again, the fog curls thicker around your ankles, and the city beckons you onward. There's another layer to peel back, another story waiting in the dim light ahead. This time about the people who controlled these spaces and the strange industry that grew from human exhaustion. You follow the sound of footsteps and hushed murmurs until the street narrows again, funneling you toward a row of buildings that look almost identical. Same crooked roofs, same soot-stained walls, same faint glow leaking through thin curtains. But inside these walls, a different London exists. A London run not by workers, but by the people who profit from them, the lodging house keepers. You approach one such house, and even from the street you can feel the presence of its owner. A man whose shadow moves across the window like he's pacing, counting, calculating. When you step inside, he greets you with a nod that's polite enough to pass as friendly, but sharp enough to remind you money is the only language spoken here. His name isn't important. There were hundreds like him, but his appearance tells you everything. His coat is thick, clean, and well-mended. His boots shine under the weak lamplight. His belly pushes slightly against his vest, proof of regular meals. He has the look of someone who doesn't work with his hands anymore, not because he never did, but because now other people's exhaustion earns him a living. He gestures proudly toward the room behind him. "Full house tonight," he says. Always is when the weather's cold. There's no guilt in his voice, not even a hint of discomfort. This is business, and business is good. You glance around. The entrance hall is surprisingly tidy compared to the rest of London's lodging houses. The floors are swept, poorly, but swept. There's even a little framed picture on the wall, leaning slightly to one side. A small attempt at respectability. The kind that tries to say, we're not a slum. We're a service. But then you're led to the inner rooms, and the illusion cracks. The moment the owner opens a door, all the familiar smells hit you. Damp clothes, old sweat, the faint sting of disinfectant someone probably used once last month. The room is filled with coffin beds stacked side by side, like drawers in a giant, human filing cabinet. He beams with pride, as if showing off luxury suites. He explains the pricing structure, tapping a chalkboard where faded numbers tell a story of desperation turned into economy. 5 pence for a coffin bed, 3 pence for a rope, 2 pence for a bench, 1 penny for standing room. And if you have nothing, well, the street is free. You ask him whether people ever complain. He laughs, a short, dry sound. Complain? About what? It's more than they'd get anywhere else. You can't argue with that, and neither can the workers who sleep here. A woman approaches him hesitantly, asking if she can pay tomorrow because she didn't make enough today. He doesn't even glance at her before saying no. She swallows her words, nods, and slips outside into the cold. You watch her go, a quiet reminder that lodging house keepers ran their establishments with the precision of accountants, not caretakers. As you move deeper inside, you notice each room feels like a puzzle designed to fit the maximum number of bodies in the minimum amount of space. Beds are arranged with geometric efficiency, leaving only narrow aisles you have to turn sideways to walk through. It's the Victorian version of optimization. Today, we optimize for convenience. Back then, they optimized for survival and profits. You overhear 2 lodging house keepers talking in a corner about how to increase capacity. One suggests building a second tier of coffin beds, stacking them like bunks. The other worries the floor won't support the weight. They both shrug. The conversation drifts on, casual as discussing weather. Historians still debate exactly how widespread double-stacked coffin beds became, but the idea alone feels uncomfortably plausible. Another keeper proudly shows you a ledger filled with names, payment counts, and neat rows of numbers. He runs his finger along the entries like he's reciting poetry. Good week, he says. Cold weather brings customers. You notice a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It's not cruel, just practical. He's a businessman operating in a world where misery is demand. And demand never stops. A woman who works as a washerwoman approaches him, desperate for a quieter bed. She explains she needs rest for a big laundry day tomorrow. He offers her a coffin bed near the wall, for an extra penny, of course. She hesitates, counting her coins. When she nods, the lodging house keeper pockets the money with the efficiency of a machine. You pass through another room where the beds are older, the wood swollen from damp air. Someone arguments breaks out about a missing blanket, and the keeper steps in instantly, not to resolve it kindly, but to make sure it doesn't escalate enough to damage property. His tone slices through the tension like a blade. Everyone falls silent. Order restored. You realize something unsettling. These keepers weren't villains. They weren't saints either. They existed in the strange, ethical gray zone created by poverty. People who built their lives by controlling the fragile line between shelter and exposure. They provided a service the city desperately needed, just not with compassion as part of the package. You step outside again, blinking at the sudden chill. Behind you, the lodging house hums with noise, muffled voices, creaking boards, the sighs of people too tired to complain. You glance up at the building and notice the faint glow of lanterns behind thin windows. It looks, from a distance, like any ordinary home. But now you know better. Inside, it's an economy of exhaustion, regulated by the men who own the beds. You pull your coat tighter around your shoulders and step back into the fog, ready to explore the next part of this city's story, where rules, regulations, and reformers began paying attention to these cramped spaces and what they found shocked even them. You walk farther down the road until the buildings begin to change. The walls here rise taller, the roofs arch higher, and the paint, though peeling, is lighter than the places you've just come from. This part of London carries a different kind of tension, like the city itself is holding its breath. And as you listen, you start to hear another sound beneath the fog, voices arguing behind closed doors. Not workers, not lodging housekeepers, but lawmakers, inspectors, reformers, the people who finally decided to look inside the coffin bed world and realized it was far worse than anyone imagined. You approach a brick building marked with a faded government seal. Its doorway buzzes with activity. Clerks rushing out with stacks of papers, inspectors heading into the streets with clipboards tucked under their arms, their faces stern and tight. They look like people who expected to find a mess but discovered something far uglier. You step closer, and through a cracked window you hear snippets of conversations, unfit for human habitation. Ventilation practically non-existent. 27 people in a space meant for 6. The clerks write it all down, shaking their heads as if trying to dislodge the images lodged in their minds. You follow one inspector as he heads toward a lodging house you recognize, the one you saw earlier. When he enters, the keeper straightens his coat, forces a smile, and insists everything is perfectly respectable. But you've seen behind those doors. You know better. The inspector walks slowly through the rooms, his expression shifting from neutral to horrified. He marks down notes, taps at walls, checks the windows, crouches beside a coffin bed, and measures its width. His chalk scrapes across the board with the urgency of someone documenting a crime. And in a way, that's exactly what he thinks he's doing. He approaches a group of tenants, asking how long they've lived like this. They shrug. This is normal to them. One man says he's been in coffin beds for 3 years. Another says he shares a rope with 2 other workers, depending on who gets back from the factory first. A woman says quietly, "At least here we don't freeze." The inspector writes that down too, then pauses, because it's not a defense, not really. It's survival talking through cracked lips. As he walks out, he shakes his head. "This can't continue," he mutters. "It simply can't." But nothing in Victorian London ever changed quickly. You trail behind him to a small meeting hall, where several reformers sit around a sturdy oak table. They wear the kind of clothes that resist grime, the kind of gloves that never touch rough wood, the kind of expressions found on people who are shocked only because they never had to see the truth before. One reformer, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, slams a report onto the table. "You cannot expect human beings to sleep in those," she says, her voice cracking in outrage. "It's as if we're storing them like goods to be shipped." Another reformer adds that the coffin beds contribute to illness. One sick man infects the whole room. Contagion spreads like wildfire in those conditions. Historians still debate just how much these lodging houses accelerated disease outbreaks, but there's no arguing they didn't help. A younger man stands and reads from a newspaper article describing a recent inspection. Filth, overcrowding, and moral danger. That last phrase makes a few people shift uncomfortably. Victorians loved moral danger almost as much as they feared it. They argue. They pace. They draft proposals that sound hopeful but fragile. Regulate the lodging houses. Set minimum space requirements. Reduce overcrowding. Mandate ventilation. Inspect regularly. Close the worst offenders. It's ambitious. It's righteous. And it's so painfully slow. Outside the meeting hall, you see posters advertising public lectures about urban health and the condition of the working poor. Reformers gather crowds, showing sketches of coffin beds that make the audience gasp. Pamphlets circulate. Newspapers publish scathing reports. And London, slowly, begrudgingly, begins paying attention. You walk along a street where a group of sanitation officers discuss new standards. They talk about ventilation, drainage, fresh air, concepts that sound obvious now but were groundbreaking then. They debate whether coffin beds should be removed entirely or simply regulated out of existence. One officer jokes that his job is removing misery one bucket of disinfectant at a time. Farther down the street, you see a landlord reading a new notice posted on his wall. His eyes narrow at the phrase, mandatory inspection. He mutters curses under his breath, complaining that regulations will ruin the lodging trade. But he knows he has no choice. The tide is turning. The change isn't fast. It isn't complete. It isn't generous. But it begins. Some lodging houses expand their windows. Others reduce the number of beds per room. A few remove the coffin beds entirely, not out of compassion, but because it's easier than dealing with inspectors. Some of the worst houses are shut down, boarded up, condemned. The city marks them as hazards. But reforms can't erase decades of poverty, or the lives shaped by it. You pass a group of residents reading a posted regulation about improved sleeping conditions. One man scoffs and says, "About time." Another rubs her hands together and says, "Maybe now we sleep without coughing all night." The youngest among them reads the notice again and whispers, almost to himself, "Maybe this winter won't be so cruel." You step back into the fog, feeling the shift in the air, not the weather, but the mood. Change has begun, even if only in small, bureaucratic steps. And as London adjusts, so does the fragile ecosystem of its poorest residents. Ahead of you lies another layer of this story. The moment the world outside these neighborhoods begins to see what's happening, when journalists start shining light into the darkest corners and force everyone to look. You head deeper into the city, and the streets widen again, dotted with gas lamps that flicker like tired sentinels keeping watch over the night. The fog thins enough for you to see the outlines of tall buildings, newer, sturdier, and cleaner than the lodging houses you've just left behind. This is the part of London where newspapers are born, where ink stains fingers instead of coal, and where truth, when someone is brave enough to print it, echoes louder than any inspector's report. You pause at the entrance of a newsroom, its windows glowing with warm light. Inside, the place buzzes with frantic energy. Journalists lean over desks cluttered with papers, shouting to printers, gesturing wildly, arguing over headlines. The air smells of ink, hot metal, and urgency. You slip in quietly, and nobody notices you. They're too consumed by their work. This is where the Coffin Bed story begins to change from whispered secret to public outrage. A young reporter stands in the middle of the chaos, waving a notebook as if it's on fire. His sleeves are rolled up, his hair is a mess, and his voice is hoarse from arguing with his editor. "People are sleeping in boxes," he shouts. "Boxes? You can't tell me that isn't news." His editor groans, rubbing his temples. "Everything in this city is news," he mutters. "But fine, show me what you've got." The reporter slams his notebook on the desk and flips it open to sketches he made. Narrow wooden coffins lined in rows, ropes strung across rooms, people curled up like discarded laundry. You recognize the scenes immediately because you've walked through them. And the editor goes silent. His eyes widen. His jaw tightens. He pulls the notebook closer and whispers, "Is this real?" The reporter nods. Every word. The room changes instantly. An artist is called over to refine the sketches. A compositor begins setting type. Another reporter rushes out to verify details. The editor barks orders like a general preparing for battle. You realize this isn't just a story anymore. It's an expose, a spark, a match struck in a very dry city. In the corner, two reporters whisper about similar stories. A lodging house where 20 people shared a single blanket. Another where someone died overnight and wasn't discovered until morning because nobody had room to move. These aren't exaggerations. They're fragments of a reality people have chosen not to see. You drift closer to a senior journalist reading a draft. He adjusts his spectacles and murmurs, "If we're printing this, it needs to make people uncomfortable." Another replies, "Sleeping in coffin beds is already uncomfortable enough." He nods. "Yes, but the middle class needs to feel it." You follow him as he walks to the printing room. The machines roar to life, huge, monstrous things that shake the floors and spit out knowledge at frightening speed. They churn, thump, hiss, and finally release the first sheet of paper onto a tray. You take a peek. Inside London's coffin bed houses, where the poor sleep like the dead. The headline is bold, haunting, unignorable. You step outside as the workers bundle the pages into stacks and toss them onto delivery carts. Kids sprint into the night with fresh papers under their arms, shouting headlines into the fog. Their voices ricochet through the streets. Coffin beds. Coffin beds. Read all about it. Curious residents begin gathering under lampposts to read. One man's eyebrows knit together. A woman covers her mouth. A pair of factory foremen, drunk and loud just moments ago, suddenly stand very still as they read. The city begins to absorb the truth, and you can almost feel the ground shift beneath your feet. You trail behind a group of men discussing the article. One scoffs, "Surely it's exaggerated." Another shakes his head. "No, my cousin saw those beds himself." A third mutters, "Terrible, but what can we do?" The question hangs in the air like the fog, thick, heavy, unresolved. Nearby, a seamstress reads the article and wipes her eyes. A dock worker folds the paper carefully, like it carries the weight of someone he knows. A group of housemaids whisper about a friend who sleeps in coffin beds after night shifts. Truth is contagious too, and tonight it's spreading faster than any disease. You walk on until you reach a small cafe where two journalists sit by the window, fueling themselves with weak tea. One leans forward and says, "If people could see those coffin beds, the city would erupt." The other taps his pen against the table. "Then let's show them," he replies. "We'll go in undercover tonight." Your pulse quickens as you follow them out. They slip through alleys, disguising themselves in shabby coats to blend in. You trail behind at a distance as they approach a particularly notorious lodging house. The owner eyes them suspiciously but lets them in after they hand him a few coins. Inside, you watch the journalists' faces tighten as they take in the sight. Rows of coffin beds, people lying motionless inside them, the thick smell of damp wood and shared breath. One reporter scribbles frantically. The other sketches. Their eyes dart around like they're afraid of missing a single detail. A man nearby asks what they're doing. One journalist lies with surprising skill. "Checking the space. I'm new here." The resident nods sympathetically. "First time's rough," he says. "Second time's worse. But you get used to it." That line alone would make a headline. Back outside, the two journalists walk toward the river, their faces pale. One finally speaks. "We have to write this as it is. No softening." The other nods. "People need to know." And they do. For the first time, the outside world is being pulled into the cramped darkness of the coffin bed houses. And you walk across a bridge, listening to the river's slow whisper, understanding that tonight marks a turning point. Because once a city sees, truly sees, what it has ignored for so long, it cannot look away again. You cross the river and step into a cleaner, quieter part of London, a place where the fog still curls along the pavement but doesn't cling to people like a second skin. Here, the streets widen, the houses grow taller, and the lamps glow brighter. This is the world of the city's middle class. Not wealthy, not aristocratic, but comfortable enough to sleep in real beds with real blankets in rooms that don't smell like mildew and despair. And it's also the part of the city that had no idea what was happening just a few miles away. At least, not until the newspapers forced them to look. As you walk, you begin to notice patterns. Windows lit by soft golden lamps, curtains drawn neatly, crisp silhouettes of families moving inside warm rooms. People well-fed and well-dressed stroll the street with slow, leisurely steps, because they don't have to rush anywhere. You pass a baker closing shop for the night, stacking pastries no one bought. A seamstress collects her display dresses from the window, humming softly. A pair of friends laugh as they pass you, discussing which play they'll see next week. Then one of them pulls a newspaper from his coat pocket. The laughter stops. They step beneath a lamp, unfold the paper, and fall silent as their eyes travel across the headline about coffin beds. One of them mutters, "Surely not." The other shakes his head. "Must be dramatized." But they keep reading anyway. And as they do, their shoulders slump, their faces pale, and the night around them seems to grow colder. You continue on, weaving through the streets as more people read the same paper, at bus stops, in the glow of taverns, under archways where couples walk arm in arm. Some shake their heads in disbelief. Others let out sharp, horrified gasps. A few fold their papers quickly, as if the words burn their fingertips. You hear conversations spilling into the street from open doorways. How can people sleep like that? Coffin beds? Surely it's an exaggeration. They ought to shut down every one of those houses. But where will those people go? That last question always ends the conversation. You pass a tea shop where a group of school teachers sit by the window with steaming cups. One reads the article aloud while the others react in waves. Grief, disgust, disbelief. One teacher covers her mouth. Another murmurs, "I knew poverty was bad, but this." A third whispers, "Why didn't anyone stop it sooner?" Why indeed? A carriage stops beside you as a well-dressed couple step out, both holding newspapers. They share a whispered conversation with their driver, asking if he's heard of coffin beds. The driver nods grimly. He grew up in the East End. His quiet, "Yes, ma'am, it's real," hits harder than any headline. You move on, following the ripple effect of truth spreading through a class that never expected to confront it. Middle-class London is experiencing something strange tonight. Empathy mixed with guilt, horror layered with helplessness. At a bookstore on the corner, a small crowd has gathered around a public notice board where someone posted sketches of coffin beds clipped from the newspaper. People lean in close, tracing the outlines of the narrow boxes, the cramped bodies drawn inside. A woman gasps and drops her hand to her chest. A man beside her mutters, "That's no place for anyone to sleep. Not even animals." Another man quietly adds, "But they're not animals. They're workers who keep this city alive." Even children are affected. A teenage girl clutches her mother's hand, eyes wide. "Mama, is it true?" Her mother hesitates. I don't know." But she does know. They all do now. You turn down a quieter street lined with modest row houses. In front of one, a father sits smoking a pipe while reading the article. He shakes his head, muttering to himself. All those men, all those women sleeping in boxes. He stares at his own warm windows for a long moment, then shakes his head again, slower this time. Beyond him, a group of young clerks gather outside a tavern doorway. They're debating loudly, their voices edged with outrage. Something must be done, one insists. We can't call ourselves a civilized city and allow this. Another counters. Well, the poor multiply faster than we can help them. A third snaps back. So we just let them rot? Is that your solution? The argument continues, heated and messy, but it proves something important. People are thinking, talking, grappling with a truth they didn't ask for, but can no longer ignore. You cross into a wealthier part of the district, where even the gas lamps burn brighter and the air smells faintly of flowers rather than soot. Here, the reactions take a different tone, not disbelief, but discomfort. You overhear snippets of posh voices. What an awful thing to read before bed. Surely the city should intervene. It's tragic, yes, but what can we do? It's just the way of things, dear. People clutch their coats tighter, as if the cold in the article might seep into their homes. A lady on a balcony reads aloud to her husband. He sniffs dismissively and says, "They ought to work harder." She stares at him in stunned silence, because even she knows that's nonsense. A few streets over, you find a small church where candles burn brightly inside. People, middle class and working class alike, sit quietly in pews, many clutching newspapers. The priest speaks softly about compassion, charity, and dignity. His sermon isn't loud, but it carries weight. Some people wipe their eyes. Some bow their heads. Some simply sit in stunned thought. The city's conscience is waking up, one lamppost at a time. But outrage alone doesn't build beds. It doesn't erase poverty. It doesn't make the streets safer or warmer. What it does do is shine light into darkness. And tonight, London's middle class is seeing shadows they never knew existed. You leave the calm, lit streets and walk back toward the older neighborhoods. And as the fog thickens again, you realize the story is about to shift from outrage to action, from public shock to private sacrifice. Because while lawmakers argued and journalists revealed, it was the charities, quiet, stubborn, determined, that stepped in to change things first. You follow the curve of the street as the warm glow of the middle-class district fades behind you. The fog settles heavier again, reclaiming the roads like a slow-moving tide. But this time, something different stirs within the mist, a softer presence, quieter footsteps, voices that aren't harsh or hurried. The city may be failing its poorest residents, but not everyone is looking the other way. You turn a corner and find yourself standing before a modest brick building with a single lantern above the door and a wooden sign that reads, "Night Refuge. All welcome." Inside, the atmosphere is entirely different from the lodging houses you've seen. There's no shouting, no frantic coin counting, no owners calculating profit margins. Instead, the air carries the warmth of boiling broth, the soft shuffle of blankets being arranged, and the low murmur of people speaking gently, as if trying not to disturb the fragile hope floating through the room. This is one of London's charitable shelters, built not by businessmen but by churches, mission groups, and ordinary citizens who decided that the poorest deserved more than narrow boxes and ropes to sleep on. Their budgets were tiny, their reach limited, but their work mattered. In the center of the room, a woman in a plain dress hands out tin cups of hot tea. She has wrinkles around her eyes, laugh lines and worry lines mixed together, and she moves with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this every night for years. You watch as she presses a cup into the hands of a shivering dock worker. "Drink slowly," she tells him. "You'll warm up from the inside first." The worker nods, murmuring a thank you with a voice so small it almost disappears into the steam rising from his cup. Nearby, a group of volunteers spread straw onto the floor, then covers it with worn but clean blankets. These aren't coffin beds. They're not even beds at all, but they're soft, warm, and, most importantly, free. No penny for a rope. No bargaining for a coffin box. No fear of being turned away if you're a penny short. A man with a worn Bible tucked under his arm approaches you. He introduces himself as the refuge's night overseer. He explains how the mission began. A small group of churchgoers visited a slum, saw children sleeping in coal sheds, and decided something must be done. They had no grand plan, no government funding, just compassion and borrowed space. But somehow, they created a haven. He gestures toward the room. "We don't have much," he admits, "but we have enough. Enough to keep them alive, at least." You walk farther inside, passing people who are settling onto the makeshift sleeping pallets. Some eat bread dipped in broth. Others clutch warm bricks wrapped in cloth, Victorian hot water bottles. A young girl sits beside her mother, humming softly as she wraps her hands around a cup of tea. It's the gentlest scene you've encountered all night. But even here, exhaustion hangs thick in the air. A volunteer tends to a man whose hands shake uncontrollably from cold and labor. She rubs ointment on cracked knuckles, murmuring encouragement. In a corner, a boy coughs sharply, and two charity workers tilt him forward, rubbing his back with practiced care. Nothing is fancy. Everything is human. You sit for a moment on a bench, watching the quiet rhythm. Someone places a blanket around the shoulders of an elderly woman. Another volunteer hands out small candles to people afraid of the dark. A man with a badly injured leg is offered a place to sleep near the fire so he won't stiffen up overnight. You overhear two volunteers discussing the growing number of people seeking help. "We had 20 last night," one says. 32 the night before that. The other nods grimly. "We can't keep up. We need more space, more hands, more everything." Historians still debate how widespread and effective these early shelters were, but they undeniably became lifelines for thousands. You wander into a small side room where a woman stitches patches onto blankets. She works quickly, humming a soft hymn. She tells you the blankets come from donations, some from wealthier families who choose charity over ignorance, others from people who have little but still choose to share. She pauses her sewing and looks at you with tired eyes. "If we don't help them," she says, "who will?" It's not a rhetorical question. It's the foundation of the entire shelter. Outside, you notice a line forming. Word spreads fast among the homeless, and even faster in winter. The volunteers open the door and begin letting more people in. Some carry nothing but their coats. Some carry everything they own tied in a handkerchief. Some carry exhaustion that looks heavier than their bodies. You step aside as a young man limps in, clutching his side. A volunteer rushes to support him. Another spreads a blanket on a pallet. They treat him like a person instead of a burden, something you haven't seen much tonight. Across the room, a preacher offers a short prayer, not demanding, not booming, just a quiet benediction for strength and warmth. A few join in. Others simply bow their heads. One man whispers afterward that this is the only place he's ever felt safe enough to close his eyes properly. You sense something profound here. These shelters weren't just about warmth or food. They were about dignity, about reminding people they were still human, still seen, still cared for, even when London's brutal nights tried to convince them otherwise. As the fire crackles softly and the room slowly settles into a shared calm, you step back outside. The fog wraps around you once more, but this time it feels different, not as heavy, not as cold. Maybe compassion warms the air a little. You continue walking, knowing that as necessary as these shelters were, tragedy still crouched in the shadows, waiting in wooden buildings packed too tightly, built too cheaply, watched too loosely. And soon, London would learn the hard way what happens when desperation, cramped spaces, and open flames collide. You leave the quiet warmth of the refuge behind, stepping once more into the fog-soaked streets where the cold presses against your coat like a warning. London exhales a long, low breath through its alleyways as you walk, and the deeper you go, the more the buildings seem to lean inward, closer, darker, heavier. You can feel the tension in the wood, the tightness of the spaces, the way every structure here seems one spark away from disaster. And then, somewhere ahead of you, you hear shouting. You quicken your pace, turning down a narrow lane where people are rushing in the same direction. Their silhouettes tremble in the flickering lamplight as they break into hurried steps. You follow them around a corner and suddenly see it. Orange light strobing through the cracks of a lodging house doorway. A thin stream of smoke curls upward, and for a moment you think maybe it's just a cooking fire gone wrong. But then someone screams. That's when you realize the truth. The house is burning. Victorian buildings were tinderboxes, cheap wood, tar paper roofs, walls stuffed with straw or nothing at all. And inside lodging houses, everything you've already seen, crowded coffin beds, rope lines, rags stuffed into windows, shared candles, created the perfect conditions for disaster. All it took was one dropped flame, one overturned lantern, one careless spark. Inside the burning building, you hear frantic coughs, desperate shouts, the thud of feet trying to escape down narrow stairs. People spill out into the street. Men with coats smoldering, women clutching children, boys covered in soot and shaking uncontrollably. You catch the arm of a young man who nearly collapses as he reaches the fresh air. His chest heaves. His face is streaked with black. He tries to speak, but can only cough violently, each breath like sandpaper dragging across his throat. Someone beside you yells, "The top floor is still full," and runs back toward the door. Another man tries to stop him, grabbing his coat. "You'll get yourself killed." The rescuer only shakes him off and vanishes into the smoke. You watch the faces of those gathered, the frantic hope, the terror, the helplessness. This isn't a rare event. Tragedies like this scarred the city again and again, when too many bodies slept too close together with too few exits and too many candles burning through the night. The fire grows brighter, hotter, licking the edges of the windows like a starving beast. It crackles and pops with the violence of burning wood, and you can feel the heat even from where you stand. People cover their mouths with sleeves and scarves. Some cry out for friends still inside. Others grip their own arms tight, shaking, knowing they escaped only by seconds. A window shatters above you. A burst of flame punches outward, sending sparks spraying into the fog. A few men form a line, passing buckets of water from a nearby pump, but the fire is too strong, too hungry, too fast. Victorian firefighting was more hope than technique. You listen to fragments of panicked conversation around you. "It started from a candle," they said, "fell onto someone's blanket." No, it was the stove, too many people crowding around it. A man knocked over his lantern getting out of a coffin bed. No, a child, someone said the child. Nobody knows the exact cause. Historians still debate which specific fires began how. Candles, pipes, cooking coals, stoves, but the pattern is the same. One spark, many victims. A woman collapses beside you, sobbing over a lost satchel, not because it holds valuables, but because it holds everything she owns. A volunteer from a nearby mission tries to comfort her, placing a blanket over her shoulders. She clutches it like it's the only anchor she has left. Through the smoke, you see the man who ran back into the building stumble out again, coughing violently, dragging behind him a boy so small he looks like a shadow. The crowd surges forward to help. Hands reach, lift, steady. The boy's eyes flutter open, and a fragile cheer ripples through the group. But not everyone is accounted for. A man beside you whispers a name into the night, over and over, like he's praying for it to rise from the flames. No answer comes. A woman screams her husband's name. Two boys shout for their brother. Every cry cuts through the air like broken glass. The fire rages on, devouring the wooden structure with merciless speed. Beams crack and collapse. Roof tiles fall like burning stones. The building shudders once, twice, then lets out a low, guttural groan, as if the house itself is dying, and collapses inward, sending a roaring burst of flame skyward. The heat slams into the crowd, forcing everyone to retreat. Silence settles for a moment, the kind of silence that feels like ashes. Someone beside you murmurs, "Too many. Far too many." You can't disagree. As the flames dim and the smoke drifts upward, You look at the charred remains of what used to be home. For dozens of people who had nothing but these coffin beds, these creaking floors, these fragile walls. Tonight wasn't the first fire. It wouldn't be the last. Victorian lodging house fires became grim reminders of how precarious life was for the poor. There were no safety codes, no fire escapes, no inspections strict enough to prevent this, and no second chances for those who didn't get out in time. Slowly, the crowd disperses. Some walk away in stunned silence. Others cling to each other, forming small, trembling circles of grief. A few linger, staring at the ruins as if trying to memorize this moment. Because tomorrow, the city will move on, the ashes will be swept away, and the night will swallow the memory of these flames. You step back into the fog, feeling the weight of smoke still clinging to your clothes, your hair, your breath. Tragedy lingers in the air, thick and mournful. And as you walk, you know the next part of this story will bring you closer to the end of the coffin bed era, to the moment the city finally begins to pull itself out of this darkness. You walk away from the smoldering ruins, and the night air feels strangely hollow around you, emptier than before, as if London has exhaled something it can't take back. The fog gathers again, thicker now, swallowing pieces of the broken building behind you until all that remains is an orange glow and a memory that will linger far longer than the smoke. But London doesn't stop. It never has. And as you walk deeper into the old neighborhoods, you begin to sense the slow, grinding shift that eventually changed the fate of the coffin beds. Not a sudden awakening, not a sweeping reform, but the kind of change that creeps in through cracks, through outrage, tragedy, and the stubborn work of people who refuse to look away. You pass a group of city officials talking as they pace along the street, their breath turning to steam in the cold. One of them gestures angrily toward the direction of the fire. "We can't let this continue," he says. "We're stacking them like cordwood. Human beings. This is beyond unsafe." Another official shrugs. "We can't fix this overnight." "No." The first snaps, "But we can start." And they do, slowly, awkwardly, often imperfectly, but undeniably. By the mid to late 19th century, London begins to pull the coffin beds out of the shadows. You sense the shift most clearly in the public notices plastered on street corners. New regulations for lodging houses. Mandatory ventilation. Maximum occupancy limits. Required inspections. The signs look stern, bureaucratic, and maybe a little self-congratulatory, but for people sleeping in coffin beds, they represent something close to hope. You wander into a lodging house that looks different. Still cramped, still dimly lit, still far from anything you'd want to stay in overnight, but better. The ceilings have been cleared of hanging ropes. Some rooms have fewer beds than before. A few windows actually open. You run your hand along a coffin bed that's less splintered, less mold-stained. Someone has tried to scrub the walls clean. A tired man sitting on a bench tells you things are changing. "Used to be 40 of us in one room," he says. "Now they allow 20. Still too many, but you can breathe now." Another man adds with a half-smile. "Inspector comes by once a month. Keeps the rats out, at least." They both laugh softly, not because it's funny, but because laughter sometimes makes the truth lighter. You walk on and notice that some coffin beds have been replaced entirely. In one lodging house, new bunks made of sturdy wood have been installed. Not luxurious, not even close, but wider, safer, less coffin-like. A woman folding linens tells you. The city says these beds have to be a certain size now. Real beds, they call them. You look at the bunks. They're basic planks with thin mattresses, but they're not boxes. That alone feels monumental. Outside, you hear a shopkeeper complaining to his neighbor about the new rules. "Costs too much to reorganize," he grumbles. "Good," his neighbor replies. "Maybe it'll stop those fires." Across the street, a pamphleteer hands out freshly printed leaflets titled "A Dignified Night's Rest, the New Model Lodging House." He explains enthusiastically that these updated shelters, some funded by charities, others by reform-minded investors, offer cleaner rooms, proper beds, and actual supervision. Many are still basic, but compared to the coffin bed houses you've seen, they look almost humane. Historians still debate exactly when coffin beds disappeared completely. Some argue the 1880s, others suggest they lingered in certain slums into the early 20th century. But what's clear is that they began fading as London's housing laws grew teeth and its conscience grew louder. You continue walking, and the signs of change multiply. A building that once held coffin beds is being renovated. Men haul out planks that look eerily familiar, long and narrow with years of scratches carved into their surfaces. You watch as a worker tosses one into a cart. It lands with a hollow thud, and you realize you're witnessing the physical end of something that shaped thousands of nights. A carpenter nearby shakes his head. Never understood why they made them like that, he mutters. Another worker replies quietly, because people would sleep in anything, if they were desperate enough. Their words hang in the air. You move through a neighborhood where new brick tenements rise. Crowded, yes, but safer, sturdier. Laundry lines crisscross between windows. Children play in the street. Women chat on stoops. You can almost feel the city trying to reinvent itself, one breath at a time. Near a small park, a charity group sets up a table with warm soup and blankets, greeting a line of people who wait not with fear, but with something closer to expectation. The volunteers talk about expanding their refuge, about partnering with the city, about building spaces that don't require people to sleep tied to ropes or inside wooden boxes. The night feels lighter here. Not perfect, not healed, but lighter. You stop near an alley where an old lodging house still stands, closed now, its windows boarded, its sign faded. You can almost picture what used to happen inside. The coughing, the scraping, the shifting bodies, the rasp of exhaustion. Now it's silent. The kind of silence that feels like a chapter closing. A child runs past you with a stick, tapping each lamppost as he goes. His laughter rings through the fog like a promise that the next generation might not inherit the same hardships. You keep walking toward a row of buildings with wide doors and newly posted notices: safe shelter, clean beds, affordable rates, city-approved boarding house reform, housing available. It's not glamorous. It's not luxurious. But it's something coffin beds never were: a step forward. The fog swirls around you again, and as you leave the last remnants of coffin beds behind, you feel the city reshaping itself. Not quickly, not flawlessly, but earnestly. The coffin beds fade into memory, into history books, into whispered stories of how hard life once was. And you walk on, knowing there is one final chapter to witness, the lingering echo of this era, and what it means for London's past, present, and the quiet human need for a place to rest. You move slowly now, letting the fog guide your steps through streets that feel quieter than before, gentler, somehow, as if London itself is settling into a reflective hush. The worst of the coffin bed era lies behind you, but its echoes linger everywhere. In the alleys, in abandoned doorways, in the faces of people who still scrape by on the thinnest margin of survival. History doesn't vanish the moment laws change. It fades gradually, like embers cooling after a long, punishing fire. You turn down a narrow lane where the buildings are old but sturdy, their bricks repaired, their roofs retiled. A few newly built lodging houses stand nearby, cleaner, brighter, structured with actual safety in mind. Their windows glow with steady lamplight, not the frantic flicker you've grown used to. They promise warmth, not danger. Inside, you catch glimpses of narrow metal beds, simple blankets, and rooms that, while small, don't crush the human spirit. A man sweeping the doorway nods to you as you pass. Hard to believe what this place used to be, he says. Before they fixed it. He pauses, leaning on his broom. Before they cared enough to fix it. Then he shrugs and returns to his work, letting the dust swirl into the cold air. You keep walking, crossing into an older district where the past hangs heavier. Here, the boarded windows of long-closed coffin bed houses stand like tombstones for a way of life no one wants to remember too clearly. You peek through a crack in one warped wooden door and see only darkness, the kind that feels thick, as if it's hiding the memories of hundreds of weary bodies folded into cramped wooden boxes. A stray cat darts out from behind a broken barrel, startling you for a moment before disappearing again. The street is quiet, but not empty. You sense the ghost of 1,000 footsteps here, workers trudging home after endless shifts, children clutching blankets too thin for the cold, women whispering lullabies in cramped, airless rooms. You think of the people you met in the early chapters of this night. The dock workers, the chimney boys, the mothers curled protectively around their children, The man who joked that Coffin Beds gave him a preview of the afterlife. The woman singing softly to herself in the alley. Their stories don't vanish just because the beds are gone. They linger in the brickwork, in the fog, in the city's bloodstream. Farther ahead, you see a small memorial tucked beside a church wall, a simple plaque, almost unnoticed. It honors the unnamed poor who lost their lives in lodging house fires, in outbreaks worsened by airless rooms, in winters cold enough to freeze a breath midair. Someone has placed fresh flowers beneath the plaque. White lilies. Their brightness stands out against the dull stone. You pause and let the moment settle around you. A group of children runs past, laughing, their boots splashing through puddles. They have warm coats, clean faces, bright eyes. They know nothing of coffin beds, not really. Their world is different. Their nights are safer. Their futures wider. The city may still be imperfect, still uneven, still struggling, but it has grown. It has learned. It has changed. You walk again, letting your mind wander back through the journey of this night. You remember the noise, the constant churn of horses, carts, coughing, shouting. You remember the dim rooms filled with bodies arranged like lifeless parcels. You remember the inspectors with their notebooks, the reformers with their outrage, the journalists sketching what they hoped the city would finally confront. You remember the fire, the screams, the smoke, the helplessness. And you remember the small pockets of hope, the night refuge with warm tea and old blankets, the volunteers who treated strangers like neighbors, the shelters that bloomed in forgotten corners, the quiet resilience of people who endured more than most could imagine. The fog thickens again as you reach a hill overlooking the Thames. The water glimmers faintly beneath a sliver of moon. London stretches on before you, vast, imperfect, endlessly alive. You breathe in the cold night air and feel the weight of the story settling gently into place. Because the tale of Coffin Beds isn't just about wooden boxes. It's about endurance, about humanity squeezed into narrow spaces, about the slow, stubborn march toward dignity, even when the path is steep and dimly lit. It's about people who survived nights that offered so little comfort, so little mercy, and yet somehow found ways to keep going. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the city's hum drift around you. A soft wind brushes your cheek. Somewhere far below, a ship's horn echoes on the water. And all the stories you've carried tonight begin to blur into something quieter, softer, heavier with meaning. As you turn away from the river and begin the slow walk back through the fog, the city seems to whisper its final lesson. Even in its darkest chapters, London held on to threads of humanity, thin, fragile, but unbroken. And as those threads wove together over the years, the coffin beds disappeared, but the memories they left behind still remind us how much people can endure, and how deeply they deserve a safe place to rest their heads. Your steps grow slower now, not from exhaustion, but from the calming quiet that settles over the city as the night deepens. The fog drifts gently around you, no longer heavy or cold, just a soft curtain that muffles the world into something peaceful. The echoes of the city fade into distant murmurs, thinning like the last traces of a dream slipping away at dawn. You breathe in deeply, letting the air fill your chest, letting the weight of the night's stories dissolve with each exhale. The harsh images blur first, the tight wooden boxes, the narrow ropes, the rooftops glowing orange with fire. They dim, soften, drift backward into the mist like lanterns floating out to sea. What remains is quieter, the warmth of a shelter's hearth, the murmur of volunteers handing out tea, the glow of a lamplight reflected in the Thames. These memories settle around you like a blanket, light, gentle, familiar. Your mind grows heavier, your thoughts unspooling into slower, lazier threads. The world becomes soft motion, soft light, soft breath. Even the city's heartbeat seems to quiet itself, as if nudging you toward rest. The fog curls at your feet, almost like it's guiding you, slower, slower still. Your eyelids feel warm. Your breathing deepens. Each sound grows distant, as if softened by velvet. And as London fades into a gentle hush, the stories of this night settle into the quiet corners of your mind, no longer sharp or heavy. Just echoes, drifting, dissolving. Let them go. Let the night cradle you. End of script. Sweet dreams.